Hello there. Have you sat on the sidelines of crypto, occasionally peering in and wondering if you've lost out millions? Stick around. You're statistically the prey of the people we'll be talking about today. You're low to middle class, you're moderately financially literate, or at least you like to think so, and you've got a concept of crypto, not enough to really know what's going on, but enough to want to invest in it. That, or you're desperate, and hey, crypto millionaires exist, seems to work for some people, maybe it'll work for me. My name's Michael. I've worked with crypto projects for years at this point. I won't be naming my employer, of course, or any specific projects that I've worked with, but I want to go into the psychology of the people that say they have your best interests in mind, the linguistics, and generally break down the process of starting and ending coin. I won't be breaking down the concept of crypto as much as actually going into the mechanisms of taking your money. Let's start with some vernacular. The lingo here is designed to make your head spin. It's making the argument that if something is complicated, then it must mean something. The arcane intricacies of the systems and processes, it's really sand thrown in your eyes in order to make you blink while saying, "Hey, idiot." I know it's difficult to understand, but give me money, I'll make you more money. You remember Bitcoin? Well, this is that, but you're getting in at the ground floor. There's a lot of obfuscation appealing to users' ego, making them feel smart about investing into volatile and shaky products, making them savvy and informed by doing so. The fact is, there's only really a couple types of projects. There's NFTs, there's tokens, and then there's the stuff around it. So trading platforms, different ecosystems, tech solutions, and so on. Let's briefly go over them one by one just so we're on the same page. Various tokens. This is probably the most common type of bullshit out there. It's very simple to make one yourself. You simply pick a blockchain, pick the supply, pick the initial price, and off you trot. The problem is you need some sort of hook and an ad campaign to sell it. The hook is usually some aspect of utility, which generally tends to be quite conceptually shaky. It's part of a gold mine that we don't own yet. It allows access to parts of an app that you don't even really need, used as buy-in currency for literally just online poker, a lot of different other things, but generally speaking they tend to lack an actual use. NFTs. An NFT really is still a token. It doesn't really matter what the difference is, it's too negligible, but it does tend to have some sort of visual representation, like a terrible piece of digital artwork, which tends to be procedurally generated and just bad. But now that people are a little bit more knowledgeable, they tend to ask the question, why is this monkey worth a house? So you also need some utility for an NFT. A popular solution is basically a trading card game, but with NFTs, where every single trading card costs you upwards of, well, at least $100. You can use them as access to talk to your favorite football player when we onboard him, which will be at some point. You can buy an NFT, which is actually a digital representation of an actual art piece. Of course, we couldn't onboard any decent artists, so all of it is quite bad. But you do get to have a shitty painting in your house if you buy it. It can also be fractionalized pieces of assets. You take a stock and you break it into 10 different parts and you sell them separately, except no, you can't, because that's not compliant to regulation, but you can still dream. But a lot of the time it's functionally nothing different from a normal shitcoin. Quick side note, if you've been paying attention, this does sound like a perfect scheme to launder money, because none of this is really tracked, because the way that blockchains work is that they're anonymous. Which, yes, it is a perfect scheme to launder money, which is why NFTs are becoming more and more popular as the art world faces regulation. Listen, Tony, they're called NFTs, they're worth so much money because they're made of computers. On that note, let's finish about non-fungible tokens. Infrastructure. Now, this is a general term. This can be a lot of things, from the coding necessary to make a token run and have a functioning blockchain, to massive corporations which were initially financial institutions but now have a storefront in the crypto world in the form of an exchange, which, that's pretty self-explanatory. It's basically just an exchange. It's a place to trade shit. The issue is these tend to be terribly regulated, and usually they take a cut from you opening a trade as opposed to a cut from you making money, which means that they actually have a lot of incentive to get as many terrible coins on there and have people trade them, as opposed to making sure that these tokens are actually regulated and safe for people to use. Not that Wall Street or Nasdaq or anything like that is any better at all, but here it's honestly profane how little they care. Now, there's a lot of things that I'm not covering, but it generally tends to fall under the same umbrella. It's either some variation of a token, an NFT, or some sort of infrastructural aspect, which you don't really need to worry about in this video. So the model of taking your money is pretty straightforward. In a waltz tempo, here's the rub. First, the planning stage. So let's say you're either stupid, greedy, or a bit of both. If you're anything of the above, then if you've been hanging around certain corners of the internet, you've probably thought of launching your own token. If you're stupid, you probably believe the whole decentralization narrative and are probably a fascist, a libertarian, or some spin on the two. You see, the initial conceptualization of crypto back in 2008, after the massive financial crash where banks fucked the economy of the entire world for a very long time, people had different views on why that happened. Some say that the banks had too much power, too little regulation, maybe too much regulation. It really depends on your point of view. The issue is, with these people, banks quickly turned to Jews. And now you have crypto fascists, which would be scary if they didn't have a panic attack every time they left their basement. Now, if you're greedy and not quite as stupid, you probably know that the decentralization isn't there. Most of the big exchanges are owned by banks, old money, or nouveau riche assholes that own 40% of the supply of a token. Yes, centralizing it. The problem here is that you aren't one of the above. Yet you understand how easily manipulated people that trade crypto on a retail level can be, and you want to get your fingers into that pie. Congrats, you're a greedy moron, but there's a problem. A simple speculative instrument no longer cuts it. Like we mentioned, people want some utility and a point to your token. Really anything that involves any sort of access, selling of any sort of products, or gamify literally anything and use the tokens as monopoly money. Now, if you're really smart, you won't even come up with it on your own. You'll find some tech bro or a CEO who's literally older than the hills to convince them that crypto is hot and hip and it's the ticket to getting more investments, raising more money, and generally finding a larger audience. Now, this has resulted in calls where one of the representatives is a fair bit younger than me and the other one is literally older than my grandfather. So think of that what you will. Great, now go and pitch your half-baked concept to some investors, maybe daddy, maybe some friends, maybe some actual investors, which do exist in various launch pads and platforms where they're literally looking for new projects to pump and then dump. You'll get some money to develop the actual product, and that's the first step done. Now it's the whitelist or the pre-sale. At this point, most projects realize it's been a couple of months and they haven't made a single cent so far. So what to do? Well, do I have a solution? You can do a whitelist and a pre-sale. A whitelist is a list of people, usually your cronies and some investors, who have a front row seat to buying the token when it's launched, usually before it's launched, just so they can have a good amount of supply at a massive premium where they'll be able to make much more money than someone who bought in at a later stage when the price is already pumped somewhat. While the pre-sale is the actual sale. This tends to be a closed affair. Sometimes it isn't, but a lot of the time it is, where you and your people who are in the whitelist, if it was even done, because why bother? No one knows about the project yet except for your friends. You have a sale where they buy the token at 10 cents a piece, and the point here being that you, the average user, is not invited. A public pre-sale is a little different. Instead of just selling to your friends, you already have a little bit of an audience where the people buy in at a premium. This tends to sell out very quickly. It's a small amount of the supply, and again, the point here being that when the price gets pumped, they're going to have a massive return on investment. But the problem here is that it pumps the price by creating scarcity. You already have sold 30% of your supply, 20% of your supply, and the fact is that the liquidity just isn't there, so you already don't have the amount of dollars that the coin costs if the whole thing were to be cashed out. You see, there's an issue here. But yes, the idea here is that when the plebeians start buying the supply, the cost is going to go up, they're going to add liquidity to it, but every single sale makes the price go up, which means that every single new person coming in will have to pay more. While you and your cronies have bought in at 10 cents, now the cost is $1. And that's the pre-sale / whitelist stage. And so we come to the hype train stage. At this point, you need to get some liquidity, which means idiots, which means low quality ad campaigns. Now, since these people are pretty bad at counting, they tend to be very impatient as well. These campaigns usually take about 2, maybe 3 months, sometimes less, which really isn't enough for any sort of project or IPO or anything like that. But you have to understand that crypto bros do have the attention span of actual lobotomites, so you need to really keep their attention, and if someone gets interested in a project now and the launch is in half a year, they're going to lose interest. The outline is always roughly the same. They need to get the messaging on point and get people to actually read what they're saying, the ideas, the story behind it. Especially if it's an NFT, they seem to have weird storylines behind them for some reason. Start with a Twitter account, get a Telegram or Discord as well. An Instagram is somewhat common for NFTs because it's a visual medium, but really anything beyond that is unnecessary. These accounts start posting pretty basic information, not informing people, just hyping them up, because if you were to get into the real innards of how these projects work, that's literal anti-marketing. Not that crypto bros know a scam if it spits in their face. On top of this, you want to buy some articles on places people would recognize: Hacker Noon, Bitcoin.com, Coindesk, so on. A little bit of an appeal to authority to get some trust in there, some SEO value, and maybe even some traffic. Now, the main dish is usually some entirely obnoxious ad campaign through any sort of medium you can imagine. This would be socials, so social ads. This would be Google Display Network, which would be banners and things like that. And of course, terrible YouTube ads. Bonus points if the English is completely unintelligible in them. These are usually the meat and potatoes of any sort of traffic generation for these sort of projects. But the prize, what everyone wants, is influencers. Usually it's a couple of sellout crypto bro talking heads with all the integrity and credibility of casino streamers with half the audience, yet asking for hilarious amounts of money. Now, all of this goes on for a couple of months if the company has money for it, which is a big if. For some reason, everyone thinks that the magic number of followers on socials is 10,000, which isn't a lot, but okay. Let's say in 2 months you get there and you're ready to drop. The launch. To much fanfare, we're dropping the token, lads. The pre-sale people, they hodled. We all waited, we didn't FUD, and now we're all gonna make it. First day or week or so goes super well. You sell, say, 200,000 worth of the supply of the token. Then it starts to stagnate. Turns out 10,000 people wasn't enough. And the people you did have are pretty poor, they don't have any buying power. Too poor to get to your entirely arbitrary goal of raising 5 million. For whatever reason, that's another hallmark. They all want to raise 5 million and they all want 10,000 followers. I don't know what that's about. Now, this wouldn't be a surprise if you weren't dropped on your head as a baby, but if you do a little bit of maths, then let's say you invest $50,000 into the project. Usually it's about 15, but let's be generous. And you want to raise 5 million. That's a 10,000% return on investment, which is not even just unrealistic, it's ridiculous. But for some reason, they're surprised every time. And now we get to the fallout. So you've ground to a halt, the price has stopped growing, the community is cannibalizing itself. What do? Well, you have 3 options. Number 1, you stay on the project until it meanders into obscurity, all of the people leave taking their money with them, which means you don't have any liquidity, the project fails, and you're one of tens of thousands of projects that have gone down this route. Number 2, you have a little bit of a head on your shoulders, so you reinvest the money you made into the marketing campaigns, praying to Ayn Rand that you don't run out of idiots who are ready to buy the token and that the sales do actually cover the cost of the marketing, and try to ignore the fact that you're in an idiot doom spiral just because you couldn't count. Number 3, leave. Literally just withdraw your funds, tell your friends to do the same. The funny thing about this is that every project has liquidity problems. When you try to cash out, you need the dollar equivalent of that amount to be sloshing around in the system. But because the price, often by design, is grown disproportionately to the amount of money that's inserted into the system, due to what they call bad tokenomics, you usually can't withdraw all of the tokens and have the whole dollar equivalent, because it's a completely floating currency, which means that it's not backed up by anything, which means that it can just deflate. Now, if you and your friends and investors and people who participated in the pre-sale can see that this is coming from the inside and you decide to simply take your money and go, the plebeians wouldn't have any liquidity left, which means they'd be left with a completely useless supply of fun bucks which they can't even cash out because they're not worth anything. Now, some of the plebeians, they would have seen this coming, or maybe even knew from the beginning that this was going to happen, and they will sell their supply last minute, making a profit in the process, but fucking over the people that are left. Now, this may sound like a greater fool scheme, because it is. The funny thing here is that option 3, leaving with the money, it still nets you a profit personally. So let's say you put in 50k and you made 200,000. That's $150,000 worth of profits. That's not bad. The problem, of course, is that there's no real incentive to finish a project if you can just do this. And no one will do anything about it either. A lot of these projects are run by people that don't dox themselves. People don't know who's doing this to them, which means that no one can even pursue anything. And of course, most of these companies are not registered in the US or Europe, but Seychelles, Cyprus, things like that, places that are really just offshore havens where there's not a lot of regulation. You're basically guaranteed to make money in this case, and fuck the dumb pools who believed in the project and the idea that you're selling. Now, this, ladies and gentlemen, is a pump and dump scheme, and this constitutes probably like 80% of all crypto projects, even if not by design originally, often by the end. All of this can of course also happen with NFT collections. The added pain of people laughing at your monkey profile picture is just a bonus. That's generally the life cycle of these things. Now, I know I've come off as hostile towards retail crypto investors, the people buying it, the poors, the plebeians, and it's really because I have an allergy to people being placed in an environment where they're not forced to do bad things, but it clearly profits them, because in most cases people are going to do that. The justification that if someone is stupid enough to fall for a scam means they deserve it is basically just mental gymnastics to try and convince yourself that you aren't morally bankrupt, unless you're an actual sociopath. You're preying on the desperate, the uneducated, the tech illiterate, whose only real fault was the fact that they were at the wrong place at the wrong time and you managed to pour your honeyed words into their ears. The fact is, a lot of the people that are starting tokens, that are buying tokens, that are talking about tokens, they were the same dummies that are getting scammed right now by design. But some of them got lucky, they got jaded, the sunk cost is too high, they have a gambling addiction, or they're just very gullible and believe the problem isn't conceptual or systematic, but it's just them getting in on it too late, or they didn't play their cards right. Which to an extent is true. If you're really careful, you can make money off of pumps and dumps, and this is not an endorsement. This is not something I recommend you do because it's very risky. But if you know exactly what you're doing, there is a way to profit off of it, although it's still something I wouldn't recommend, because any money that you gain from something like this is money that you take from someone else. I have nothing but empathy for the people that are delusional, the people that have cognitive dissonance, because the problem is, the grueling reality of capitalism is pushing down on them so hard that it's impossible to pass up a money button. The problem is, this money button is also being sold by people looking to profit off of them, who have turned scamming into a fine linguistic science. And no one is immune to people using their desperation. And in times like this, who isn't desperate, really?